I would be remiss to not ask you about us putting together Talking Smack.
Ah,
Why did Talking Smack work? And why is it so hard to replicate something like what we had?
so it's funny because when the network launched, there was a need for content, right? As there is when any network launches or when any network is just in existence. You
Yeah.
need content. And what could we do outside of the in-ring stuff that was going to appeal to the fans? And a lot of that stuff sometimes just fell over to me. Hey, we want to do this, or we want to start doing these kickoff shows before the pay-per-view to sell, or we're going to start doing these post shows and pre-shows for Raw and SmackDown. So we were making it up as we went. And to answer your question about what made it so special, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, I think what made it so special is that we made it up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there was no rule book, right? Like you constantly hear folks, talking about like, oh, well, the WWE's rules and parameters, etc. That wasn't anything that was on Raw or SmackDown, or excuse me, Talking Smack and Raw Talk. But specifically Talking Smack, because I think what made Talking Smack so special, that show wouldn't have been what it was if it weren't for you and Brian. You and Brian made that show what it was. And again, right, it's just kind of like the devil's in the details there, right? Like you got, Brian is in the midst of this tumultuous part of his life where wrestling was taken from him, and he's still involved in the business somehow, but it's not where he wants to be. Right. But he's making the best of it. But also, right, to like we know Brian was also kind of taking the piss out of things while he was doing Talking Smack, and not in a way that he wasn't trying, not that he wasn't trying to like bury anybody or not get anybody over, right? But like he was having fun, and you were finally in a position to where you could work as a host and a presenter without any sort of limitations, right? Like you got to be Renee. You got to have an opinion. You got to, do your part in storytelling. And for me, it was how.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just put it back on you a little bit here too, because as much as yes, you can see Brian and I hosting the show, and you could see our chemistry, and it was giving new talent a really great place to come and figure out their characters, figure out promos, working all that stuff out. But this was also an opportunity for you to get to work without all of those parameters that we were used to as well. This was a big creation of yours.
Yeah. And I think what helped me in that position was that creatively, I knew where we were. You know what I mean? And I think regardless of whether we had parameters or no parameters, it had been instilled in me to do what was always best for WWE, to do what was best for the business. And for me as a producer, one of the main functions that I hold paramount in all my work is to make sure that my talent looks the absolute best that they possibly can look. And I don't mean that just from aesthetics. I mean that from presentation to, what they're saying and how they're going, etc. It's a multifaceted approach, and we got to do some pretty cool things, and we created moments, right?
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
It's funny. You always hear people talk about the Miz and Brian's interaction, the one episode where Brian got hot and walked off. What people forget was the setup that we had done. I think it was a week or two prior. And I know you remember it. I think Mike was left off the show.
Intercontinental title. Right?
Yes.
He was champion at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, he was left off the show, and he is cutting this impassioned promo to the camera. And I remember going to you, Renee, take me off the air.
Yes. Yes. I remember that. Yeah.
And I didn't even tell Miz that we were going to do this. I just said, Renee, take me off the air. If Mike is talking about how he's underutilized, abused by the system, et cetera,
wrap him up.
Amplify it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you didn't even wrap him up. You literally just did your sign off to the camera, and we faded out. And he's still on his harangue about being misused and wanting to bring glory back to the Intercontinental Championship and being disrespected, etc. And it was just that next step that was needed to get him to come back and to have that epic confrontation with Brian. That
God, I forgot about that. That's such a brilliant, like that really was the key to unlocking the reason for him to completely come and unleash the next week or this 2 weeks away.
Yeah. I mean, right, is what do we do to feed that story? What do we do to feed that fire, right? Like, you could argue that a lot of Mike's frustrations at the time were legitimately coming out on the air, and he had every right to be, right?
Yeah.
And to be able to give him that outlet, and then look at what we did, right? We had started creating moments and enhancing characters on the show without any adult supervision. And it's funny, right? Once the whole thing happened with Brian,
then the adult supervision kicked in real quick.
Then the adults came in and they said, hey, you guys are doing something here. We're going to start putting a couple of writers on this. And slowly but surely, and it's
God rest its sweet soul.
Yeah, not taking anything away from the writers. They're an unbelievably talented group of folks, man, who bust their ass off. But there was just something so organic.
We weren't overthinking it. Yeah, we weren't trying to overthink it too much.
Well,
and if you see a moment, amplify it. But
that's where those parameters started to come in, right? You know what I mean? Like, even when we would do our kickoff shows, I never liked to tell you guys what to say. I would, make sure that you guys were setting each other up well. What are the points that we should hit, etc. But then at a certain point with those kickoff shows, they started to get writers on, and they would come on headset and be like, hey, Mike, just so you know, Renee has a line to hit here. And that's where, I know I'm not the easiest person to work with, but, I've had no problem a time or two telling a writer to fuck off when they were trying to get involved in what we were doing.
Fuckity, fuck off.